Hey there, I'm Diane Lee. I am the Marketing and Communications Director here at ISI. And thank you so much for tuning in today to our Sustain It or Explain It podcast. Wonderful guest today. I'm so happy to introduce you to Nancy Predahl, who is the CEO and president of Lamp Rynearson. She's also an ENVSP, and they're a member organization of ISI. Also, we have Mike McMeekin, who is the executive director for the Engineering Change Lab USA. And Mike is also an ENVSP, and he has, get this, 44 years of experience in engineering. Way to go, Mike.
Thanks for revealing that, Diane.
I know, but I had to. We are talking today about the future of engineering. And so before we talk about that, though, really delve into it, I want to revert to just how engineering has changed over the years, because Mike has 44 years of experience. So Mike, give us an idea of what you've seen over these past decades and how it's changing.
Sure, Diane, thanks. Two things come to my mind right away as the biggest changes that I've seen throughout my career. First is the level of automation in the way we accomplish our work. I can't even tell you how non-automated we were at the beginning of my career. And of course, that has changed the mix of employees in engineering organizations. In the past, or in my early years, there were so many draftsmen and support people like that. And now with automation, all of that is consolidated in the engineer for the most part. And the other thing that stands out to me is the complexity of the work we do, the complexity in terms of the stakeholders that are involved, the complexity of the regulations that we deal with. Projects are totally different now than they were, and even the complexity that technology introduces into projects. So those are the two things that stand out to me looking back over all those many 44 years.
What do you think, Nancy? You agree that it's automation and it's, as Mike said, with these things, with the different stakeholders involved?
Yeah, when I started at Lamp Rynearson 24 years ago, I was doing some work in the computer as an engineer and some drafting, but we had a whole suite of drafters that helped us. And now our engineers are in the computer doing the work that we used to have other folks doing. So yeah, it's really, technology change has really been a big impact on how we do work, the speed of which, so you have the technology increasing the speed and the expectation for how work is being completed. But on the other side, Mike mentioned regulatory requirements that are actually slowing things down. And there's been kind of a swing in the last several years of more regulatory reviews and processes that have put projects on a slower pace than they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, and
so
that's
advantage of technology, and then the counterpoint to that is just really the complexity of projects, which Mike mentioned as well, but how you get projects done and through the process actually might take longer than it did 5 years ago, for sure.
Yeah, and when we live in this world now where things need to be rapid, they need to be just firing away. And if you're not, I could see where that could be really problematic. Want to remind people who are watching that you can go ahead and ask us questions in the chat. Send us where you are from. Like, I'm from Washington. I'm coming to you live from there. And Nancy and Mike are in Omaha, Nebraska. So give a shout out to where you're from. We'll put it up on the screen. Ask some good questions. I have a question for the audience, actually. I'm going to steal this from the United for Infrastructure webinar I was on yesterday. But they asked, if you were the Supreme Commander of the United States or whatever, and you could wave your magic wand and you could have something that you wanted to achieve in infrastructure, just one thing, and you could have it be so, what would it be? So I'm going to ask the audience, please engage with us and let us know, what is it that you would like to see when it comes to infrastructure. I know what I would say. What about you guys? What would you say? I know
Well,
you got an answer.
I was thinking, as you asked the question, I was thinking about if we could, the one change we could make would have that infrastructure funding would increase equity in our communities so that it was just a non-issue. So if I had one wish, we would have funding in place that equity to all aspects of our communities would be available and in play.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And especially right now with everything that's going on in our country, and equity is going to be a big deal in the future for engineering. Wouldn't you agree, Mike?
I agree totally. And my response to the question is related to how we get there. And we need to spend less on healthcare and more on infrastructure.
Less on healthcare, more on infrastructure. I'm curious about that, Mike. I have to explain that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Just real simple. We spent 19% of our GDP on healthcare and about 3% on infrastructure. And that's out of whack compared to where it should be.
That's probably a whole nother discussion because
yes, it is, Diana. I'm sorry I opened that up. Yeah.
No, I love it because you have my wheels spinning here in my brain, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe he's right. I'm starting to think about how that could happen. So, but anyway, we'll talk infrastructure. I love it. You know what they said yesterday is they said high-speed rail. There was some great discussion on how one person wanted high-speed rail everywhere. They thought that could be the great future of engineering if we started connecting everything with high-speed rail. Another said digital broadband, which they thought kind of leads into equity, where you could, because so many people in so many regions do not have access to broadband, it has created horrible inequities. And so that was another area that they mentioned. But mine, of course, would be Envision. And I would say I would want Envision in all RFPs and RFQs and every federal lawmaker, state lawmaker, provincial, you name it. I want you to know what it is and to use it as a solution. So that's mine. But we're getting some great comments here. So let's see. We'll put them on the screen. This is Ronald Kent, and he has an EMVS piece. He says, use less waste and energy. Yeah, I could concur with that. Wouldn't you agree, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. That's what Envision is all about. Part of what Envision is all about. Yes.
Yeah, generate less waste and better energy sources. Here's one. Let's see. Hi from Israel. Hi, Israel here. Oh, okay. Let me read this again. I flunked reading in school. Israel Emilio something Perez. From Mexico City. He's an EMVSP. Welcome and thanks for joining us from Mexico City. By the way, we are venturing into Mexico, so I think we're getting more and more interest. At the end of the month, we actually have a podcast that we're going to be talking about venturing into Mexico with Envision. So, send us what your comments are and what you think that you would like to wave that magic wand and see what we would have for infrastructure. So let's talk a little bit, Mike and Nancy, about the future of engineering, some of the challenges besides equity, besides technology. Let's talk about that environment, because that's one of the challenges we see right now. The wildfires, the hurricanes. I think, Nancy, I was talking to you and you got some smoke in your area. You could actually, right?
Last couple of days it's been pretty hazy, which usually we don't get the smoke from the west. We get it sometimes from the south from wildfires in Kansas, but we are getting it now. And when you think about the challenges, and if you were to list all of the super disruptors that are happening right now, it's pretty overwhelming with the pandemic, with the climate impact, with these supreme events that are going on with the hurricanes and the fires, and that's just the United States. You think about other communities that are also being impacted, the social unrest, the economic insecurity globally. It's just a lot. So as a firm leader, thinking about just our staff and our clients and our teammates and our communities and how all of these stressors are really coming together this year, and how can we look beyond that and take care of each other. And I think, so short term, it's really how do we take care of each other right now
Right.
And just the mental health of all of those impacts can be pretty profound. But then how do you then take what we've learned in this time, during this time of this pandemic and all of these major disruptors, and then build our firms for the future for the better, so that we come back out of it stronger, that are the services we provide are what's most needed, and we're addressing our community needs in ways that we couldn't have before. So that's one of the blessings of all of this unrest, is
Yeah.
that causing me to pause and really think about how is it that we want to be as a firm going forward. And I think that other firms are in that same position. So more on a firm level, but those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
What about you, Mike? What do you see as with those stressors bearing down upon us for the future of engineering? She's talking about with the firms and how they may need to change. What about engineers? What about firms? What do you think as far as the future goes?
Yeah, I think 2020 has made it really difficult to think long term, right? We have all these short term things just hitting us in the face day after day. But I think being part of Engineering Change Lab, we do what we are all about is more the long-term approach and the challenges that we're facing long-term. And I think particularly with respect to climate change, what we're experiencing this year is a precursor. This is not the only year where we're going to experience that. So we've got to begin to build that long-term thinking that these events that seem like outliers may not be that so much of an outlier in the future. But beyond that, we're also thinking about technological trends, huge accelerating changes in technology that are impacting engineering and impacting society. And with society, or with engineering, let me talk about that. First, we need to be concerned about how technologies are going to disrupt the way engineering has always been practiced.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, are those technologies going to be used for the benefit of society moving forward? And then there's things like population growth and decaying infrastructure and waste, things like plastic waste, which are such a huge long-term problem that are on the horizon as well.
What do you see as for the future of engineering that engineers are going to need to do differently, or they're going to need to know, like what are AI, remote learning? What are we talking about as far as concrete examples of how engineering is literally going to be different or changed that way?
Rather than look at I cannot pick which one single technology may have the greatest impact long term. But what has become clear to us in our work in Engineering Change Lab is probably the most important thing that engineers need to develop to a greater extent is their ability to be systems thinkers and to understand the total impacts of the work that we do on the environment, on communities, on people that are using technologies, and understanding those total system costs or total system benefits of the work we're doing. That's the shortest way I can answer in terms of what we need to do better in the future.
No, I totally concur with that. And I think that that's where Envision comes to play, because Envision is that tool to help engineers think long term, to think outside the box, to collaborate better with others, better project management tool altogether, to just step outside the box. And Nancy, you're an EMVSP, so would you agree that something like Envision is a tool that really more people should embrace to tackle these kinds of challenges in the future?
Yeah, I think that we have a couple of projects local in our community that are in some disadvantaged areas of our community. And we've been talking about how even if we propose to our clients, would you like to go through the Envision process? We'll do it outside of the scope of the project because it's the project budget is more limited. But even just having that conversation of quality of life, how do you connect these communities? How do you connect centers of jobs so that people can get from one to the other. And how do you connect that community with this? It happens to be a trail project, but through nature and art, and bringing all of those pieces in. Those are all in quality of life in Envision. And so if you really dig into the components of Envision, of the categories, and dig into how can we ask these questions with our clients, even if they're not wanting to get certified,
Right.
it brings a process together. As Mike mentioned, it's that systems thinking, bringing the community in. That's one of the credits that you can look at. How is the community engaged in the conversation? Because I think so what happens so often, especially when you're working in communities that are in need, we come in and as engineers, this would be a skill that we need to build. We come in and believing we have the answers that a community might need, but that's not necessarily the case. We have to be able to listen and to listen and to listen and ask the right questions to make sure we're adding a resource to their community that actually will have impact. And
I agree. I agree. When you have more people at the table, more collaboration, more stakeholders engaging in it from the community, which Envision promotes, then you're going to see those kinds of better outcomes because your brainstorming is just that much better. Mike, for the future of engineering, what about the skills that engineers are going to need, like leadership, collaboration, communication? What do you see as what they're needing?
Well, systems thinking, as I said, is sort of an overriding skill, but leadership, different aspects of leadership, I think, is also coming to the forefront in our work, meaning the ability to communicate across different technical disciplines, but also across different elements of the community, including with voices of the community that have been underrepresented in the past, is one skill that stands out. Building teams, different types of teams, technologists, different engineering disciplines, sociologists, all of those type of skills. And an interesting skill that has also been a focus of our work is the skill of navigating the public policy system, so that you're able to advocate for things like Envision, you're able to advocate for infrastructure funding, because without good public policy, we really can't achieve the things that are needed or address the challenges of the future. So we're also focusing on that skill of navigating in public policy.
And we are here at ISI as well. And we have the task force, which you're a part of. Mike is part of our Explain It or Explain It task force, which is part of this podcast. That's why we're doing it, because we know that advocacy is really important, especially right now in light of COVID, right? And with the environment and everything that's going crazy and haywire, we have to hear, they have to hear our voices. And to be able to communicate to them is not necessarily easy. There's like this big gap between us and them, and it's really hard to bridge that gap. So I think sometimes the more we can get more people involved, the more we're going to be able to achieve our goals, which is exciting. We're getting a lot of comments here, so I'm going to show some of them. This is Benjamin Luca, I believe, EMBSP. He says, bridging the digital divide is important. Hey, just talking about that. Also investing in maintaining and upgrading current infrastructure. How much of that is, in your opinion, it's all about like having a national resilient agenda, like having where we really focus on resilience and we do maintain and upgrade our current infrastructure, because boy, it is failing. So what do you agree? What do you think about all of that?
One of the things that that we've been thinking about is we work for a lot of small communities and around some of our office locations, and they are really significantly being impacted by the revenue shortfalls from COVID, whether it's gas tax or just sales tax. So how can we help those communities that are being so adversely impacted with revenues? And we're seeing projects in 2021 starting to get pushed out. 2020, I think the infrastructure industry hasn't been as impacted as other industries by COVID, but I think 2021 has a big cause of concern. not only for us, but for our communities. So the advocacy that we can do in making sure that we're reaching out to our legislative bodies to talk about how are you thinking about infrastructure as a way, it's much needed, and as a way of building our resiliency through an economic package. So that's one way that we can think of our communities, our clients, our communities, the people that are negatively impacted. You think about the impact on revenue on airports and just small communities, water, wastewater systems. Just how are they going to be able to keep the funding there if they don't have the revenue to fund their capital improvement projects? So the advocacy that we can do as engineers is really be informed and be reaching out to our legislative bodies to talk about, we need to be thinking about these communities that aren't getting COVID relief funds, and how important that's going to be for the viability of the future.
Yeah, on a national level, I can tell you that we have a really short window between now and the end of the month, is what they're saying, that what I've heard. They could be wrong. There's always, I'm fighting a dog right now. I got a little puppy who is trying to get up here. So basically, so we're creating a toolkit at ISI to help people to learn how to advocate within their communities, so that they can reach out to their local lawmakers and try to get them to listen. And this is going to be, even though it's a short-term thing right now, trying to get their ear right now, it is definitely going to be a long-term thing as well that we're going to need to try to do as in the engineering community. So I just want to make people aware that that's coming.
Diane, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So as you said, that's a focus of the ISI task force, right? How to convince people why it's wise to invest in sustainability and resilience. And the key is we have to be able to convince decision makers that when you have limited funds, you want to spend them in the smartest way possible. And looking at resilience and life cycle cost is the smartest way to spend the limited dollars we have. That
to me just seems like a duh, right? And like COVID proves this is one. To me, you said earlier it was possibly a precursor, and I agree. And so it's going to be maybe a lot worse in the future. So we really need to start thinking about that now. But gosh, it's just like fighting an uphill battle to get people to listen. And that's what scares me the most. Getting some folks who are here. We got Melissa watching today, and she is an EMBSB. She's from ISI. She's our managing director. She's from Ontario, Canada, Burlington, Canada, I should say. And she's enjoying the discussion. Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it. We have Israel again. 2020, a year for resilience. You kind of hit on this a little bit, Nancy, that 2020 has been a really tough year, and 2021, we don't know what the heck it's going to be like. And then 2022, I mean, it's just a day by, it feels like a day by day, month by month kind of a thing right now, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that resilience, it's an infrastructure, but very much on the people part of this. We are a profession of individuals, and so how can we keep our resiliency up so that we can have these conversations and be at the table when we need to, and support our teams and make sure that we're not working from 7 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night with no breaks, except for the puppy maybe wanting to come up in the chair.
Yeah, right. That's what it feels like.
Our families with kids in school, and what is that? So we've got to really think about this caring for the container. And I think that's a skill that we can show and emulate, is how do we care for the container of our communities? And that's the infrastructure, that's the people. And it's just, if we don't acknowledge that, I think we miss our chance to really, I had a client say that one of our engineers, they really liked our project manager because he made engineering seem human.
Yeah.
And if we can make engineering seem human, because then maybe the science behind and the reality behind what we can impact and influence if we can communicate on that level, perhaps we can have more significant change. Because when you've got this kind of polarized environment that we're in right now, it's very difficult. You're not going to change minds with facts. That's just not going to happen, no matter what side of the equation you're on. So for me, it's just how do we care for this container during this time? And that's the whole piece of it.
What changes minds? Because that's what we need. We need the AEC industry to be part of that change movement for the future, that transformation, that shift where people start to realize we have to, now's the time to kick it in gear. And I think we need to be part of that. So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, one of the things that jumps into my mind, Diane, when you say that is some work we've done in Engineering Change Lab, or some learning we've done in learning that the general public does not understand what we do, not only in engineering, but the entire construction industry, but particularly engineering. And in fact, a fairly large share of the population believes that engineers do things that are harmful. And, that ties closely, I believe, and we've seen this in evidence, in influencing why young people may choose to get into, in how they choose their field or their profession. If they don't understand that engineering and the infrastructure industry has these great benefits to society, then they're less likely to choose us as a profession. So we've got to overcome that perception. That's one thing. I talked early on about what's changed throughout my career. What has not significantly changed is the level of diversity in engineering. And until we can overcome that barrier, we're missing out on the perspectives and the skills of a big part of the population who's not even looking at us as a career. And if we can make that shift, that engineering is a people-oriented business, as Nancy said, then I think we can start to get those other shifts to the importance of engineering to protect the environment, engineering to benefit communities. And that's a long-term prospect to get there.
Yeah, that's harder. It's harder to do than we're talking about here, right? It seems like uphill battles.
Yeah. You got to start somewhere, right?
Right. No, and what's great about it is it's kind of building a strategy. You're talking about attacking it at the root and being able to develop a strategy from there that's going to really have an impact long term. And so many people just want to put Band-Aids on things, but you really have to take a problem, completely take it apart and look at it and build it up. At least that's how it feels to me when you talk about it that way. So we're getting lots of comments, and I don't know which ones I haven't put on there, but we have, he agrees with you. It's hard to see these sometimes. We've got Diana Senior from Canada, timely. Anthony, a great point from Mike. It really reinforces the need and value for companies to be vocal about their commitment to sustainability and social equity. And we have Frank, who's also on our task force. If you don't have a strong K through 12 schools, you won't have people getting into engineering from minority communities.
Yeah, and Diane, that's a really good point there, because one of the issues related to this diversity and lack of understanding is the teachers that kids have at K-12 not understanding the work and therefore really not being the best at guiding people into careers sometimes.
Yeah, and so just like when we were talking about healthcare earlier, the problems we were seeing there as being part of the problem, education is a big part of the problem. And educating people on this is a very important way to go. It starts with education. Once it leads to advocacy, it just keeps going. It's all connected. So we need to make those impacts. Nancy, one thing about your company that I wanted to talk about was social responsibility. And I see a lot of companies who talk about social responsibility, but they don't necessarily act upon it as much as I would like. And I think your company is is one that does. How important is that for the engineering community? Because you're devoted to, I think your mission is the community and empowering the community in ways. So how important is that link, social responsibility, to engineering and to the future of engineering, to make a better world for all of us?
So our purpose statement is leaving a legacy of enduring improvements while perpetuating our company for future generations. So it's a bit long, but it really does drive us. And the leaving a legacy piece is we've got our young professionals that are very much, as they come into Lamp-Rynearson, they know that being involved in the community and having community involvement is a big part of our culture. I think that we look to wanting to work into projects that will impact our communities in a positive way long term. And we've got people who want to be on those project teams, young professionals who want to be on those project teams. We have a task force right now that's really looking at diversity and inclusivity and equity in infrastructure. And that's a big topic. That's a big topic that's not going to get solved overnight. Like many of the things we've been talking about, you have to start where you're at. So that's what we're doing. We're starting our conversation, talking about equity, talking about being white, brown, and black in our organization and what that means, and talking in ways that we've never done before. And I thank the current crisis situation for opening that opportunity for us, because it just didn't feel, I didn't feel as empowered as I do right now to have that kind of conversation with my team. And so we're looking at how can we, and Envision is a piece of this, because it's such a great framework, and it takes some of the politics out of it. If you just look at, these are things that are good for our communities long term. And so this is how we can have this conversation. So one of the skills that we didn't talk about was that the finesse of being able to be at the table for conversations, and how you communicate is so important, because if you can't be heard, you're not going to have any impact.
Yes, exactly. You're speaking my language right now.
And if you come at it from a hard and fast, rather than how can I engage and tie someone into this conversation so that we can at least move a piece of this in the right direction. And if you start there, you've got to start where you're at. And so that's what we're doing. We're looking at, we're going to be doing some redlining training, understanding how redlining impacted the communities that we live in. And then how can we look at equity and infrastructure on a project by project basis. Mike talked about the big picture of policy, and I just need to bring that back down to what can I do today as a firm leader, and how can I bring people in the organization into the conversation without alienating half the organization one way or the other. So it's really finding that balance on that, tying it back into infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I'm using the Envision framework because that it's such a well thought out framework that it's not emotional, and so we can go to that as an anchor to try to bring that back into our projects and our client conversations.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because we have we're big in ISI. We're pushing that as well. That QL, I think it's 1.3 something. I'm not an EMSP yet. So I'm not quite sure if that's the actual one, but it definitely, we're making a push for that, making people realize too that it's there for you and you can use it. Is there anything, we're about wrap, I think we're like 34 minutes into this. Is there anything we've missed that we should be talking about that we haven't, guys, on the future of engineering that you think is important? What have we missed? Seems like we've talked a pretty good bit.
I'll just say that, I'm on the steering committee for the Engineering Change Lab, and the leadership that the Change Lab is showing, and that's another way that you ask, what can the engineers do? Well, you can be a part of the Change Lab. You can be a part of the dialogue and the conversation of stretching how you're thinking about what the future looks like. And I think that the Change Lab is a great opportunity for folks across the spectrum to be involved as a learner, as a stakeholder, as an opportunity to really jump into how can we change our mindset around what it is that engineering could and should be for the future. So I just wanted to throw out a plug for the Change Lab as well as Envision. So as a
No,
piece.
no, I love it. I love it. Thank you. Mike, do anything else you want to add that you haven't talked about or need to reiterate?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing, but yeah, Nancy pointed out the fact, just full disclosure, I spent most of my career at Lamprey Pearson, where Nancy is now the president and CEO. And when that leadership transition was complete, the opportunity to get involved with Engineering Change Lab came about. And as Nancy said, she's on the steering committee of Engineering Change Lab. I want to point out one thing we have learned about over our last few Engineering Change Lab summits. And it's closely related to Envision. It will, in the long term, I think, greatly benefit Envision. There's a movement going on now led by two foundations, the Lemelson Foundation and VentureWell. And they call their initiative the Engineering for One Planet initiative. And their goal is to incorporate the principles of environmentally responsible engineering into the curriculum for all engineering disciplines. And they've created an amazing framework for what that looks like, and they're beginning to roll it out in trials in several different universities. And if we can produce engineers that come out of college with that as a fundamental, it speaks well for where we will go. We'll have more engineers in all sectors who will want to use tools like Envision in the future. Again, it's long term, but it's something really important that we've learned about.
No, I mean, Envision is a long-term thing, and so is infrastructure. These life cycles of these projects are long-term, and I think with the young folks, they are the ones who are inheriting this planet, and they care about their futures, and getting everyone on board with that is where we need to be. And I think that's we talked about some of the steps. And that's one of them that needs to be taken. So I totally concur, and I love it. Before we close, I want to plug what we're doing at ISI so that people take part, because we have a virtual conference. Let me see. Let me see. I got to find it. Here it is. We have a virtual conference coming up. Nope, I didn't find it. It is November 18th and 19th. We're holding it with the Harvard Softness program. It's going to be spectacular. We're talking about having a fresh start, coming on a new year. We've had the worst year probably we've ever had. It's been tough, right? So we're hoping a fresh start for 2021. And we're going to be talking about things like equity, solutions. We talk so much about problems. I really want to talk solutions. And that's what this conference, I know, is geared toward. So it's technology, it's equity, it's all the things that we're trying to do. And get in on the conversation. Every time they hold one with this, ISI holds one of these conferences with the Softness program, they really are very informative and best practices, lessons learned, it really some great data coming out of there. And I just want to say that when you go to this ISI conference, you can renew your ENVSP credential and you get it done in one fell swoop. How much do you love that? It makes us happy you're here at ISI. We want you to go ahead and continue your ENVSP, because you never know when you're going to be called on in the future to be using it. Your organization, more and more organizations are putting this language in their RFPs, asking for ENVSPs to help drive the project, lead these project teams, and you never know when you're going to be called upon to do so. It also makes you more marketable. So I'm going to put a plug in there for that. Renew your credential. And before we go, I want to remind people of how they can learn about you guys. So let me see if I can find it. Nancy, this is your website, correct?
Correct. Yes, lamprenearson.com.
All right. And Mike, I've got yours as well. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go, Mike.
That's it. Thank you.
ECL-USA.org. So learn about Mike, learn about Nancy's company. And I know we're going to be holding a lot more of these in the future. Attend our virtual conference, and all's good. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will see you next time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Yeah, let me go ahead and put up the outro music if I can find it. Here we go.